In 1975, people were dancing to disco, watching Happy Days on TV, and filling their tanks with gas that cost less than 50 cents a gallon. But hey, life wasn't just about funky fashion and cheap fuel. This was also the era of Watergate, the energy crisis, and changing social norms. There were no smartphones, no internet, and no social media. Instead, families gathered around the TV or spent time outdoors. Now you're wondering, how did they cope? Well, that's what we are about to find out. Let's take a short trip back in time and explore what life was really like in America half a century ago. The economy and cost of living. You must have been told how valuable money used to be before now, but I bet you didn't know how much. 50 years ago, the average salary was around $8,000 per year. And while that seems shockingly low, it stretched much further than you would expect. Look at this. A brand new house cost about $35,000, and monthly rent hovered around $150. A gallon of milk was $1.39. A loaf of bread was 28 cents. And if you wanted to see a movie, you'd only need $2 for a ticket. Can you beat that? However, despite these cheap prices, life wasn't always easy. Inflation was soaring, and the oil crisis of 1973 to 74 had sent gas prices through the roof. Gas stations were running dry, and drivers faced rationing and long lines just to fill their tanks. Imagine sitting in your car for hours only to be told, "Sorry, we're out." That must have been frustrating, but your parents and grandfolks lived through it. Also, jobs were also shifting. Factory and manufacturing jobs were still the backbone of the economy, but a new trend was emerging. For instance, more people were moving into service-based jobs like retail, banking, and office work. However, wages weren't always rising as fast as inflation, making it harder for families to keep up. So yes, while 1975 might seem like an era of affordability, financial struggles were very real. Daily life and social norms. Life in 1975 followed a certain pattern, as families often followed traditional roles. Dad was usually the breadwinner, while mom managed the household. Although many women were entering the workforce, expectations about marriage, children, and homemaking were still deeply ingrained. A good wife was often expected to cook, clean, and take care of the kids, while men were seen as the primary decision makers. When it came to free time, life was much more face-to-face. Without social media, people actually talked to each other. Kids played outside until the streetlights came on, and family game nights were a regular thing. Watching TV was a big deal, but choices were limited. Unlike now that we have countless channels and networks, there were just 3 major networks: the ABC, NBC, and CBS. It was so serious that if you missed your favorite show, then it's tough luck. No DVR, no streaming, all there you got was just scheduled programming and commercial breaks. Looking back, life in 1975 had a slower pace as people weren't glued to screens. However, it also had its downsides, with rigid social norms and risky habits that would raise eyebrows today. Fashion trends of the 1970s. One of those things that never remains static year in year out is fashion. Fashion in 1975 was bold, colorful, and funky. Everywhere you looked, there were bell-bottoms, platform shoes, and almost everything was polyester. Of course, the era's style was heavily influenced by disco culture, rock music, and Hollywood icons. If you walked down the street in 1975, you'd see men in wide-collared shirts, flared pants, and maybe even a leisure suit. A full polyester outfit that was just as shiny as it was synthetic. Women, too, embraced flowy maxi dresses, jumpsuits, and high-waisted jeans that were often paired with chunky platform heels that made them tower over their friends. Fringe, suede, and peasant blouses were also huge, thanks to the lingering influence of the late 60s hippie movement. Entertainment and pop culture. In 1975, entertainment looked very different from today. There was no streaming, no smartphones, and no internet. If you wanted to watch something, you had to catch it when it aired or hope for a rerun. But that didn't stop people from falling in love with their favorite TV shows, movies, and music. On television, families would gather around the set to watch some of the best shows of all time. Happy Days brought 1950s nostalgia to living rooms across America by introducing fans to the cool and charismatic Fonzie. MASH, a dramedy about doctors in the Korean War, was one of the highest-rated shows on TV. Meanwhile, The Brady Bunch was still a favorite, with its wholesome family antics and catchy theme song that everyone knew by heart. At the movies, 1975 was a golden year for cinema. The Godfather Part 2 was released, proving that sequels could be just as legendary as the original. Comedy fans were laughing at Blazing Saddles, a Mel Brooks masterpiece that pushed the boundaries of humor. And then there was Chinatown, a gripping noir film that kept audiences on the edge of their seats. Back then, going to the movies was an event because people would dress up, buy tickets in advance, and see films in packed theaters. What about music? It was just as electric. Disco was exploding, with people dancing to songs by the Bee Gees and Gloria Gaynor. All the while, rock ruled the airwaves, with bands like Led Zeppelin, the Rolling Stones, and Queen dominating the charts. It's true 50 years is a long time, but people back then enjoyed it very much. Technology and gadgets of the time. In 1975, technology was nowhere near what we have today. There were no smartphones, no internet, no social media. What they had were just the basics. And even those felt like magic at the time. If you wanted to make a call, you used a rotary phone, spinning the dial and waiting for it to click back before dialing the next number. Also, typewriters were still common for writing documents. And if you made a mistake, you had to use whiteout or start over, and guess what? Typewriters in those days had no backspace button. Yes, computers existed, but they were massive machines, mostly used by businesses and universities. Personal computers were still in their infancy, and the idea of having one at home sounded like science fiction. Instead, people relied on encyclopedias, newspapers, and libraries to get information. One of the most exciting tech developments of the time was the rise of home video games. In 1972, the world was introduced to Pong, a simple tennis-style game that quickly became a household obsession. By 1975, gaming consoles were starting to make their way into homes and people, at least those who were looking to get a set. Anyway, despite the lack of modern conveniences, people still found ways to stay entertained, informed, and connected. Travel and transportation. Back in 1975, getting around looked very different from today. Gas was unbelievably cheap by modern standards. Let's say something around 53 cents per gallon, but that didn't mean filling up was easy. The 1973 oil crisis led to gas rationing, long lines at stations. There were even days when people couldn't buy gas depending on their license plate number. Most families had only one car, and public transportation was more widely used. Seatbelt laws weren't enforced, and many people didn't even bother wearing them. Kids piled into the back seat or even the trunk in station wagons. Yes, without a second thought about safety. Did I just ask about air travel? It was a completely different experience. It was more glamorous, with passengers dressing up in their best clothes, but it was also less accessible to the average person. Ticket prices were high, and flying was seen as a luxury rather than an everyday convenience. However, there was a perk. Security was minimal, and you could show up at the airport last minute, walk straight to your gate, and even smoke on the plane. Trains and buses were still popular for long-distance travel, and road trips were a favorite American pastime. Highways weren't as congested as it is today, and without jeeps, people relied on paper maps and handwritten directions. Maybe things are a little slower compared to now, we have to admit. Life was easier and people were more patient. Food and dining habits. In 1975, home-cooked meals were the standard, and eating out was more of a treat than an everyday convenience. Families would gather around the table for home-cooked dinners, often consisting of meat, potatoes, and a vegetable. Processed foods were becoming more popular, but scratch cooking was still the norm. However, convenience foods were on the rise. TV dinners, originally introduced in the 1950s, were gaining traction with busy families. They were usually aluminum tray meals, complete with meat, mashed potatoes, and a tiny dessert. But no one knew the fast food culture would later dominate America. Speaking of fast food, McDonald's, Burger King, and Wendy's were expanding rapidly. But grabbing a burger and fries wasn't as common as it is today. Dining out was more of an occasion, and sit-down restaurants like Howard Johnson's and Steak and Ale were go-to spots for families. One big difference from today is that family dinners were sacred. There were no distractions from phones or tablets, and conversations around the dinner table were a key part of daily life. School and education. School in 1975 looked very different from today. No computers, no smartboards, no online learning, just chalkboards, textbooks, and handwritten notes. Students relied on library books and encyclopedias for research instead of Google, and typing class was a necessity since most written work was done on typewriters. Discipline was also much stricter. Talking back to a teacher could land a student in detention or worse, a trip to the principal's office for corporal punishment. Many schools still used paddling as a form of discipline, and strict dress codes meant boys wore collared shirts and girls weren't allowed to wear pants in some schools. But what did they say about change? It's the constant thing. The early 1970s brought about progressive education reforms that emphasized critical thinking and creativity rather than pure memorization. More schools started incorporating hands-on learning instead of just lectures, and special education programs were expanding. While education in 1975 was far from perfect, it crawled so that modern school and education in general could fly. Politics and major events. The politics of 1975 is something we can't help but look into. The biggest story at the time was Richard Nixon becoming the first U.S. president to resign. Also, the Watergate scandal had rocked the nation for 2 years, exposing a web of political corruption, illegal wiretapping, and cover-ups. President Nixon was indeed facing certain impeachment, and rather than let it play out, he chose the less disgraceful route. Nixon stepped down on August 8, 1974, leaving Vice President Gerald Ford to take over. Also at the same time, the Vietnam War was coming to a bitter end. The war had divided the country, sparking mass protests, a growing distrust in government, and a generation of young Americans deeply affected by the draft. By 1975, the U.S. had pulled most of its troops out, and just a year later, Saigon would fall to North Vietnam, officially ending the war. How life then compares to now. Life in 1975 was vastly different from today, but we could debate all day if it was really simple or just different. For one, technology has completely transformed how we live. In 1975, there were no smartphones, no internet, and no streaming services. Today, we have instant global communication, but some argue we have lost the essence of real human connection. Entertainment was also different. Families gathered around the TV at set times to watch shows. Music was played on vinyl records, and if you wanted to hear a song, you waited for it on the radio instead of streaming it instantly. The economy and cost of living have also changed dramatically. In 1975, a new house averaged around $35,000, and gas was 53 cents per gallon. Today, those prices seem unimaginable, but wages and job opportunities have also shifted. Truth is, some people miss the slower pace of life, while others argue that modern technology, medical advancements, and increased social awareness have made life better and more connected than ever. So tell me, was life easier back then, or just different? Also, if you had the power, what would you back from 50 years ago? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy this video, don't hesitate to like, share, and subscribe to this channel.